The night was silent, except for the sound of the wind moving through the high cliffs. 2 moons hung in the sky, glowing pale, white, and silver, their light falling on an ancient stone temple built into the side of the mountain. The air was cold, sharp enough to bite the skin, and it carried the faint smell of smoke and burning oil inside the temple. Shadows moved in slow circles. Figures in long black robes stood around a glowing circle carved into the stone floor. They spoke in a low, deep chant that made the air feel heavy and dangerous. The language was old, older than the mountains, and each word seemed to pull at something unseen. At the very center of the glowing circle lay a young girl. Her skin was pale, but her arms and legs were covered in fine silver fur. Her ears were pointed like a wolf's, and her golden eyes were filled with both fear and defiance. Her wrists and ankles were bound tightly with thick ropes, the knots cutting into her skin. She did not cry, but her breathing was fast, and her claws scraped uselessly against the stone. The leader of the cult stepped forward. His hood hiding his face, he raised a long, twisted staff carved from black. "Bone, tonight," he said, in that strange, echoing voice. "The gate will open, and the Ancient Ones will return." The others bowed their heads, their voices growing louder as they repeated the same line over and over. Outside, far across the rocky hills, a lone human moved carefully through the darkness. His name was Daniel Kane, an explorer from Earth. He had been scanning the area. For signs of rare minerals, his scanner beeped softly in his hand, showing a faint but steady life signal. It was not human, but it was alive. Daniel frowned and adjusted his gear. He was miles from any settlement, so who or what could be here? He moved quickly but carefully, his boots crunching on gravel and loose stones. The sound seemed too loud in the empty night, and he kept glancing around. The wind picked up, carrying whispers that made his skin crawl. He told himself it was just the wind, but a part of him knew it was more. Up ahead, the hills gave way to a wide open plateau, and there he saw it, the temple. The moonlight washed over its cracked pillars and broken statues. There was something ancient and dangerous about it. Daniel crouched low, moving toward the structure. As he got closer, he could hear voices. They were deep and rhythmic, like the beat of a drum but made of words. He reached the edge of the temple wall and looked inside. What he saw made his heart stop for a moment. The girl, silver fur, golden eyes, was lying bound in the middle of a glowing circle. Around her stood the robed figures, chanting, their faces hidden. Daniel could see the ropes cutting into her skin and the way she struggled against them. Her eyes met his for a split second. In that single look, he understood everything she was telling him. Without speaking, "Help me. But be careful." Daniel's jaw tightened. He had stumbled into something far bigger than he expected. He knew the smart thing to do was to leave, to walk away before anyone saw him, but he couldn't. The leader of the cult began moving closer. To the girl in his hands, he now held a knife carved from a strange red crystal. The blade seemed to glow faintly, pulsing like it was alive. The girl's breathing grew faster, her eyes darting from the knife to Daniel's hiding place. Daniel's fingers tightened around his sidearm. But if he fired now, the whole cult would be on him in seconds. He needed another way. The chanting grew louder, vibrating through the stones beneath his feet. Then Daniel noticed something strange. The ground inside the circle was starting to change. A black mist began to rise slowly from the cracks between the stones. It moved like it was alive, curling and twisting around the girl's legs. Daniel's gut told him that whatever the cult was trying to do, they were close to finishing it. He felt the air grow colder, his breath turning white in the moonlight. The leader raised the crystal knife high, ready to bring it down. The girl shut her eyes, bracing for the strike. Daniel took one deep breath. This was it, his moment to act. If he moved now, he might stop them. If he waited even one more second, it might be too late. He stepped forward silently, his shadow falling across the temple floor, and in that instant, the girl's eyes opened again, locking onto his. A spark of hope flashed in them. She didn't know who he was, she didn't know why he was here, but she knew he was about to change everything. Daniel stayed in the shadows, his heartbeat steady. But fast, the glowing circle in the middle of the temple made everything inside shimmer with an eerie light. The cult's chanting was like a drumbeat in his head, steady and heavy. He knew if he rushed in blindly, both he and the girl would be dead within seconds. Slowly, he moved along the cracked stone wall. Each step measured, each breath controlled. The cold night air mixed with the strange heat coming from inside the temple, making his skin prickle. He stopped at a corner and peered in again. The girl's eyes were still locked on him whenever she could. She looked both terrified and stubborn, like someone who refused to give up. The ropes binding her wrists and ankles looked thick, maybe reinforced with some alien material. It wouldn't be easy to cut them. The leader of the cult walked slowly around her, dragging the red crystal blade along the floor, making a sharp scraping sound. Every cult member followed his movements with their heads, chanting in perfect rhythm. Daniel's hand brushed against the hilt of his weapon, but he didn't draw it yet. The temple was too open. One wrong move, and the entire group would overwhelm him. Instead, he scanned the area quickly, searching for anything he could use. His eyes landed on a small broken statue near the altar, half buried in dust. It wasn't much, but it could work as a distraction. Daniel pulled a small device from his belt, a compact scanner with a flash setting, and placed it carefully behind the statue. Then he stepped back into the shadows. The plan was simple: blind them for just a few seconds, enough to get to the girl. But as he prepared to activate it, something else caught his attention. From the far side of the temple, a massive carved door stood half open. Through it, the black mist was seeping in slowly, curling like smoke from a fire. It wasn't just coming from the cracks in the floor, it was coming from beyond that door. Daniel's gut told him that whatever was behind it was not meant to be free. He didn't have time to figure out what it was. The leader raised the crystal blade again, and Daniel knew it was now or never. He pressed the trigger on the device. A sudden burst of white light flashed across the temple. The cult members cried out, shielding their eyes, their chanting breaking into chaos. Daniel sprinted forward, boots hitting the stone hard. The girl flinched but didn't cry out. She seemed to understand this was her only chance. Daniel slid to his knees beside her, grabbing the ropes at her wrists. Up close, he could see the faint bruises and cuts on her skin, the dirt in her silver fur. Her golden eyes studied him closely for just a second before she gave a tiny nod. He pulled a small blade from his boot and began sawing through the first rope. It was tough, and the fibers resisted, but the distraction was working for now. Behind him, the leader shouted something in his strange language. His voice filled with rage. Daniel cut through the second rope, his muscles tense. Suddenly, one cultist lunged at him from the side. Swinging a curved blade, Daniel ducked, kicked the attacker's leg out from under him, and went back to cutting the ropes. The girl twisted her body to help. Using her claws to weaken the knots, another rope snapped free, and she could move her arms. She wasted no time. Her claws slashed at the bindings on her legs, while Daniel turned to face two more cultists rushing toward them. He drew his sidearm, this time firing a quick burst, the shots echoing in the open temple. One cultist fell. The other stumbled back. The girl ripped the last rope free and scrambled to her feet, her breathing heavy but her eyes sharp. Daniel grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the nearest exit. But as they moved, the black mist surged faster through the open door. It was thicker now, forming strange shapes within it, shapes that seemed to watch them. The girl froze for a moment, staring at the mist, her fur standing on end. "They're awake." She whispered, her voice trembling but clear. Daniel didn't know what she meant, but he knew they had to get out. The leader of the cult roared in anger. His voice carrying through the temple, the other members rallied. Picking up weapons and moving to block every exit, Daniel pulled the girl toward the side passage he had entered from. But the path was closing. 2 cultists stepped in front of it, their blades ready. The girl bared her teeth, letting out a low animal-like growl. Daniel fired again, the shots ringing in the cold air. The cultists fell, and the 2 of them pushed through the narrow passage. They didn't stop until they reached the outer edge of the temple. The cold wind hit them hard, carrying the sound of shouting behind them. The girl looked back once, her golden eyes glowing in the moonlight. "They won't stop now," she said quietly, almost like a warning. Daniel didn't answer. His mind was already racing with how to escape the hills before the cult caught them. Far behind them, the black mist kept rising, reaching toward the night sky. The wind howled across the rocky plateau as Daniel and the wolf girl ran. The night air was freezing, but the heat of adrenaline kept their legs moving. Behind them, the temple glowed faintly under the moons, its broken pillars casting long shadows. From within, the chanting had started again. Only now it was faster, louder, and more desperate. The girl glanced back, her breath coming in sharp bursts, her golden eyes wide. "They are calling to it," she said, almost to herself. Daniel looked over his shoulder and saw the black mist rising higher from the temple's open doorway. It swirled and twisted in the air like smoke, but it moved as if it had a mind of its own. Shapes flickered inside it, tall, thin figures with too many arms. For a moment, he thought he heard whispers carried on the wind. They weren't in any language he knew, but somehow the meaning slid into his thoughts. "Come closer, open the way." He shook his head hard, forcing the voice out. "What is that?" he asked, his voice low. The girl didn't look at him. "The gate," she said. "It's waking." They reached a narrow path between 2 cliffs, the stone underfoot slick with frost. Their footsteps echoed off the walls, and Daniel's senses stayed sharp. Any wrong move here, and they'd be trapped. The girl stumbled once, catching herself with a claw against the wall. Daniel slowed just enough to help her regain balance. "You're hurt," he said, noticing the shallow cut on her side. "It's nothing," she replied quickly. "We need to keep moving." The path opened into a small clearing surrounded by jagged rocks. Daniel stopped, pulling a small scanning device from his belt. The screen flickered with strange readings, not just life signs, but something else. It looked like radiation, but denser, heavier. The girl's ears twitched, picking up sounds Daniel couldn't hear. "They're following," she said, her voice tense. Daniel crouched behind a boulder, motioning for her to do the same. A moment later, he saw movement at the far end of the path. 2 robed figures stepped into view, their black hoods turning. Slowly as they searched, the mist was behind them, spilling into the clearing like water over a dam. Daniel felt the temperature drop instantly, his breath clouding in the air. The girl's fur bristled, and she took a small step closer to him. "They won't stop until I'm back in the circle," she whispered. "Why you?" he asked, her eyes flicked to his. "Because I'm the key," she said simply. Daniel frowned, but didn't press further. The cultists moved slowly, their hands gripping curved blades, their eyes hidden in shadow. Daniel waited until they were close, then grabbed a fist-sized rock from the ground. He threw it to the left, the sound bouncing off the cliff walls. The cultists turned toward the noise instantly, their movements sharp. Daniel took the chance to move, keeping low, signaling for the girl to follow. They slipped along the right side of the clearing, staying in the deeper shadows, but the mist didn't need eyes. It slid along the ground, curling toward them, One tendril brushed against Daniel's boot, and a sudden wave of dizziness hit him. He saw flashes, a massive gate of black stone. Creatures like shadows pouring through it, a sky torn apart. The vision ended as quickly as it began. Leaving his chest tight, the girl grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. "Don't touch it," she warned, her voice sharp. They reached another narrow passage, this one sloping downward into darkness. Daniel switched on a small light on his wrist, the beam cutting through the cold air. The stone walls here were covered in carvings, strange runes and drawings of tall beings stepping through a doorway. The girl glanced at them but didn't stop. "My people tell stories about this place," she said, her voice quieter now. Stories of a time before the suns, when the gate was opened and the world almost ended. Daniel kept moving, his mind processing every word. Then why would they try to open it again? He asked. She shook her head, because they believe the Ancient Ones will make them rulers. The passage widened, leading to a cave with a crack in the ceiling. Moonlight spilled in, glinting off a frozen pool in the center. Daniel stopped, scanning the water surface. It was perfectly still. But the reflection in it was wrong. Instead of showing the cave above, it showed a black stone archway standing in a field of stars. Daniel stepped back quickly. "That's not real," he muttered. "It's the shadow of the gate, the girl." Set even closed, it leaks into the world. They both turned at the sound of footsteps echoing down the passage they had just come from. The cult was close again, their chanting faint but growing louder. The girl moved toward the far side of the cave, where a narrow crack led upward. "This way," she urged. Daniel followed, casting one last glance at the frozen pool for just a moment. The reflection in the water changed, and a single golden eye stared back at him from the other side. The narrow crack in the rock scraped against Daniel's shoulders as he climbed. The girl was ahead of him, her claws gripping the stone for balance. Cold air rushed down from above, carrying the faint smell of burning oil. Somewhere far below, the cult's chanting echoed faintly. They were still following, and the sound of it made the air feel heavier. Daniel's muscles burned from the climb, but he didn't slow. The passage widened suddenly, and they stepped out onto a ledge halfway up the cliff. From here, the temple was far below, its glowing circle barely visible. But the black mist rising from it was clearer than ever. It now reached high into the night sky, twisting like a column of smoke. Inside it, Daniel could swear he saw massive shapes moving. The girl stopped, her golden eyes fixed on the mist. "They're calling to them harder now," she said quietly. Daniel didn't ask who them was. He already knew he didn't want to meet them. A sharp cracking sound broke the silence. Daniel turned in time to see a section of the ledge crumbling under the girl's feet. She gasped and dropped to one knee, her leg caught in a jagged split between the rocks. Daniel rushed to her, grabbing her arm before she could fall. The rock was tight around her ankle, pinning it hard. "Don't move," he said. Pulling a small tool from his belt, he wedged it into the crack, forcing it open. The stone shifted just enough for her to pull free. She winced in pain, but didn't complain. Daniel glanced at her leg. No break, but she was slower now. They moved along the ledge toward a narrow archway carved into the cliff face. It led into another part of the ancient temple complex. Inside, the air was warmer, lit by flickering torches along the walls. The floor here was smooth, covered in strange red symbols. The girl hesitated, her ears twitching. "This is the binding hall," she whispered. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" She looked at him with a mix of fear and anger. "This is where my kind were chained long ago to keep the gate sealed." Daniel didn't have time to process that before a shadow moved in the far corner. The leader of the cult stepped into the light, his hood still hiding his face in his hands. He held a chain made of black metal, each link engraved with glowing runes. "You took the key," his voice echoed, deep and cold. Now the key must be bound again. The girl stepped back, her claws curling. Daniel moved between her and the cult leader. The man raised the chain, and it seemed to grow heavier in the air. The runes pulsing brighter. Daniel drew his sidearm, but the leader's free hand swept through the air. A sudden force slammed into Daniel's chest, throwing him against the wall. His vision blurred for a moment, his weapon clattering to the floor. The girl lunged at the leader, her claws slashing across his robes, but the chain whipped around her arm. Glowing brighter as it touched her fur, she cried out, the sound sharp and pained. Daniel forced himself up. Grabbing the broken torch from the wall, he swung it hard. Striking the leader across the side, the robed man staggered, the chain loosening just enough for the girl to rip herself free. Daniel dropped the torch and grabbed the chain. Yanking it out of the leader's hands, it was heavier than it looked, almost pulling him down with its weight. The leader roared and reached for him. Daniel swung the chain around his arm and used it like a whip. The black metal cracked against the man's chest, sending him stumbling back. The girl didn't wait. She grabbed Daniel's arm, pulling him toward a side passage. But as they ran, more cultists appeared from the shadows. Blocking the exit, they carried spears tipped with the same red crystal as the leader's knife. Daniel swung the chain again, the runes flashing each time it cut through the air. The cultists hesitated, clearly wary of it. The girl darted forward, slashing at the closest attacker's arm and knocking his weapon aside. Daniel followed, striking another cultist hard in the side. They broke through the line, running down the narrow passage. The sound of pursuit filled the air again. The cult shouting in their strange language, they reached a heavy wooden door bound with iron. Daniel slammed his shoulder into it once, twice, before it burst open. On the other side was a long staircase leading upward into the cold night. The girl's breathing was rough, but she didn't slow at the top. They emerged onto another cliff ledge overlooking the dark valley. Far in the distance, the black mist was spreading wider, spilling over the hills like a rising tide. Daniel still held the chain tightly in his hand, the runes glowing faintly in the moonlight. The girl looked at it, then at him. "You don't understand what you're carrying," she said. Daniel stared back at her. "Then you'd better explain fast." Her gaze drifted to the mist. "That chain doesn't just bind," she said. "It can close the gate or open it." The cold wind bit at Daniel's face as he and the wolf girl ran along the cliff's edge. The black chain was still wrapped around his arm, heavy and warm despite the freezing night air behind them. The cult's shouts echoed off the stone, their voices rising and falling like a hunting pack. The girl's golden eyes kept darting toward the mist in the distance, as if she could feel it getting more. As if she could feel it getting closer. "They won't stop," she said between breaths. "They think the chain belongs to them." Daniel didn't slow, his boots slamming against the uneven rock. The moonlight lit the jagged ruins ahead, broken walls, toppled statues, and archways standing alone in the dark. Whatever this place had been long ago, it was now nothing but a maze of stone. They reached the first wall and slipped through a narrow gap, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the soft dust on the ground. Somewhere nearby, a low rumble made the stones tremble under their feet. Daniel glanced at the girl. What was that? She shook her head. "Not the cult," she whispered. Something else woke up. The path wound between shattered columns carved with strange, wolf-like figures. Daniel's light swept across them, the carvings seeming almost alive in the shifting shadows. A sudden clatter of stone behind them made him spin. Two cultists had found their trail, slipping through the gap in the wall. Daniel raised the chain, swinging it in a wide arc. The runes flared, casting a brief red glow across the ruins. The cultists hesitated, their steps slowing. The girl took the chance to dart past a fallen pillar, motioning for Daniel to follow. They weaved through the ruins, every turn bringing them deeper into the maze. But the sound of pursuit didn't fade. If anything, more footsteps joined in. The girl leaped over a low wall, landing softly on the other side. Daniel followed, but his landing sent a small cloud of dust into the air. Almost instantly, a howl rose from somewhere within the ruins, long and deep. Daniel froze. "That wasn't a person," he said under his breath. The girl's fur bristled. "They've called the Gateborn from the darkness ahead." A shape moved into the moonlight. It was tall and thin, its skin a pale, shifting gray. Its arms far too long, its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were hollow, glowing with a dim, sickly light. The creature stepped forward slowly, its body swaying unnaturally. Daniel backed up, swinging the chain in front of him. The runes glowed brighter, and the creature stopped, tilting its head as if listening. "Keep moving," the girl urged. Grabbing his arm, they turned down another narrow path. The walls here closing in so tight they had to move single file. The sounds of the chase grew louder, cultists shouting orders. The Gateborn steps dragging over the stone. Daniel's mind raced. Trying to map the ruins in his head, every path seemed to loop back on itself. The girl suddenly stopped, pressing her hand against the wall. "There's a hidden way here," she said quickly. Daniel frowned. "How do you know?" "I grew up hearing the stories," she replied. "My people were once guardians of this place." She pushed on a loose slab of stone, and it shifted with a grinding sound. A narrow opening appeared, just wide enough for them to squeeze through. They slipped inside, the darkness swallowing them. The air here was still and dry, the ground sloping downward. They followed the passage until faint light appeared ahead. It opened into a wide courtyard, the stones cracked and overgrown with pale weeds. In the center stood a broken altar, its surface covered in the same glowing runes as the chain. Daniel moved closer, feeling the chain vibrate faintly against his skin. The girl's eyes followed the symbols. "This is where the gate was last sealed," she said softly. Before Daniel could answer, a loud crash echoed behind them. The hidden door had been torn open. Cultists poured into the courtyard, their blades catching the moonlight. The Gateborn stepped in after them, its long arms brushing the ground. Daniel's grip tightened on the chain. He swung it once, twice, each strike sending sparks of red light across the stones. The cultists spread out, trying to circle them. The girl stood at his side, her claws ready. "Do not let them take the chain," she said fiercely. The first cultist lunged, and Daniel met him with a sharp crack of the chain. The impact sent the man sprawling, his weapon skittering away. Another came from the side, but the girl intercepted him. Her claws slashing across his arm, the Gateborn hissed, the sound vibrating in Daniel's bones. It stepped forward, reaching for him with its impossibly long fingers. The chain's runes flared bright, and the creature recoiled. Daniel took the chance to push through a gap between two cultists. Pulling the girl with him, they ran toward a crumbling archway at the far end of the courtyard. The ruins shook as the Gateborn let out another piercing howl. Beyond the archway, the ground sloped sharply downward into darkness. Daniel didn't know where it led, but he knew staying here meant death. They plunged into the shadows, the sound of pursuit right behind them. The steep slope forced Daniel and the wolf girl too, half run, half slide, into the darkness. Loose stones skittered under their boots and claws, bouncing into the unseen depths ahead. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the smell of damp earth and something faintly metallic. Behind them, the sound of pursuit echoed down the slope, the cult's footsteps mixing with the dragging scrape of the Gateborn's limbs. The girl stumbled once, catching herself against the wall. Daniel slowed to steady her. "You're hurt," he said, his voice low but firm. Her breathing was rough, and she pressed a hand to her side where blood darkened her fur. "It's nothing," she insisted, but her tone carried the weight of pain. Daniel didn't believe her, but there was no time to argue. The passage leveled out, opening into a vast underground chamber. Pillars of black stone rose toward a ceiling lost in shadow in the center. A pool of still water reflected the red glow of strange runes carved into the floor. The girl stopped at the edge of the pool, her eyes fixed on the symbols. "This is a binding pool," she whispered. "It can close the gate, but it comes with a cost." Daniel's gaze shifted to the chain still wrapped around his arm. "What cost?" he asked. She hesitated. "The one who seals the gate becomes part of it." Before Daniel could respond, the sound of footsteps reached the chamber. Cultists emerged from the shadows, their blades glinting. The Gateborn followed, ducking under the archway with a sickening, bone-like crack of its joints, its hollow eyes locked on the girl. Daniel stepped between them, the chain glowing brighter in his hand. The leader of the cult pushed forward, his voice cold and sharp. "Give us the key," he said, "or we will take it from your broken bodies." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You're not getting her," he said, his tone like steel. The cult leader's lips curled into something that might have been a smile. "So be it," he replied, raising his arm. The cultists surged forward. Daniel swung the chain, its weight pulling at his muscles. Each strike, leaving a red arc in the air. The girl fought beside him, her claws flashing as she intercepted attackers. But for every cultist they pushed back, two more seemed to step into the fight. The Gateborn moved closer, its long fingers stretching toward Daniel. The chain's runes flared again, but the glow was dimmer now. Daniel's arm ached, his breath coming harder. The girl glanced at the binding pool, then at him. "It's the only way," she said, her voice urgent. "If we don't seal it now, the gate will open fully." Daniel didn't answer immediately, his mind racing. If he used the pool, it would trap whoever wielded the chain, maybe forever. He looked at her. "You're not doing it," he said. "I am." Her eyes widened. "No," she said fiercely. "This is my fight, my burden." Daniel shook his head, blocking another strike from a cultist. "You're the only one who knows what comes next," he said. "If you're gone, there's no one left to stop them." The Gateborn roared, the sound making the water in the pool ripple. The cult leader shouted in his strange language, and the chanting began again. The girl's gaze softened for just a moment. "You don't understand," she said. "If you take my place, the gate will remember you. It will follow you." Daniel gripped the chain tighter. "Let it try," he said, his voice steady. With a sudden surge, he broke through the line of cultists and ran toward the pool. The leader screamed in rage, ordering every follower to stop him. The girl fought harder, buying him the seconds he needed. Daniel stepped into the water, the cold cutting through his boots instantly. He raised the chain high, the runes blazing so bright the whole chamber lit up. The Gateborn shrieked, its form flickering like smoke in the wind. Daniel slammed the chain down into the center of the pool. A shockwave burst outward, knocking the cultists to the ground. The water boiled, turning from black to blinding red. The runes on the floor flared, connecting to the chain in a web of light. Daniel felt something pulling at him, not just his body, but his mind. Visions flashed before his eyes, the gate, endless darkness, creatures crawling through it. The pull grew stronger, dragging him downward through the haze. He saw the girl push past fallen cultists, her eyes locked on him. She reached the edge of the pool, shouting his name. Daniel smiled faintly. "Run," he said, his voice almost swallowed by the roar of the gate closing. She shook her head, stepping into the water. But the light grew too bright, forcing her back. The last thing Daniel saw before the world went white was her face, defiant, furious, and filled with something he couldn't name. Then the gate's roar swallowed everything, and the chamber went silent. The silence after the roar felt heavier. Then the roar itself, the black mist that had filled the chamber, was gone, leaving only the faint glow of the runes carved into the stone. The binding pool was no longer water. It was now a solid surface of dark crystal. Cold and smooth like glass, the wolf girl stood at the edge, her chest rising and falling with each sharp breath. Her golden eyes searched the frozen pool as if willing it to give Daniel back. But it didn't move. No ripple, no sound, nothing. The cultists who had survived the shockwave were scattered across the floor. Groaning and dazed, their leader knelt near the far wall, his hood fallen back to reveal a pale, gaunt face with eyes full of rage. "You fool," he hissed at her. "He has bound himself to the gate, and it will claim him forever." The girl's claws dug into the stone at her feet. "Then I will find a way to bring him back," she said coldly. The leader laughed, a broken, bitter sound. "You can't. Fight what's beyond the gate," he said. "Not even your kind can." She took a step toward him, her shadow long in the glow of the runes. "Watch me," she said. Before he could reply, she struck, her claws cutting across his chest, sending him sprawling. The remaining cultists crawled backward, fear replacing their earlier fanaticism. The girl turned her gaze on them. "Leave," she growled. "If I see you again, I will end you, one by one." They fled into the shadows, leaving the chamber silent again. She turned back to the binding pool, kneeling beside it. Her reflection stared back, but behind her own face she saw something else. Daniel, standing in a place of endless black sky and a single towering arch of stone. His figure was faint, almost made of smoke, but his eyes were the same, calm, steady, unafraid. Her breath caught. "Daniel," she whispered, pressing her hand to the cold crystal for a moment. His hand seemed to press back from the other. "Sighed, you shouldn't be here." His voice was distant, echoing, but clear enough for her to hear. "I'm not leaving you," she said, her voice shaking but firm. He shook his head slowly. "You have to," he said. "The gate. It's watching you now. It knows who you are." She clenched her jaw, her claws scraping against the crystal. "Then let it watch," she said. "I don't care." His faint form flickered, the space around him rippling like disturbed water. "Listen to me," he said. "This isn't over one day. It's going to open again. And when it does, you have to be ready." She nodded without hesitation. "I will be," she promised. The image faded, leaving only her reflection in the dark surface. The girl stayed kneeling for a long moment, her breathing slow and steady. When she finally rose, she looked around the ruined chamber. The runes still glowed faintly, but she could feel the gate's presence fading into the distance. For now, it was closed. She walked toward the tunnel leading out of the chamber, her steps slow but steady. The cold air of the night met her as she emerged onto a high ledge overlooking the valley. The moons were still bright above, the wind carrying the smell of the distant mountains. She stopped, looking back once at the temple hidden in the darkness. Her claws curled into fists. "You're not gone," she whispered to the wind. "You're just waiting. And I'll be waiting too." She began the long climb down the cliff, her injured side aching with every step. Far in the distance, the black mist was gone, replaced by the clear light of the moons. But she knew it wouldn't last. Somewhere beyond the stars, the gate still existed. And now Daniel was part of it. The thought burned in her chest, not just as grief, but as resolve. She reached the base of the cliffs and started across the rocky plain. Each step took her farther from the temple, but closer to the path she had chosen. She didn't know how many years it would take, or how many worlds she would have to cross. But she would find the answers, and when the gate stirred again, she would be there, not alone, but ready. Because Daniel's last words weren't just a warning, they were a promise, and promises to her kind were sacred.